She only wanted cheap storage space. But inside a rusted hangar built during World War II, Maren Brooks found something sealed behind steel doors marked U.S. Army Air Forces 1944. What she uncovered weren't just engines, they were frozen whispers of a lost mission, untouched since the day they were locked away. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized. This wasn't just military surplus. It was a buried legacy someone had gone to great lengths to forget. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories of forgotten history and unexpected discoveries inspire you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's story might be even more unbelievable than this one. The warehouse wasn't even on the listing. It was tacked onto the end of a foreclosure bundle, an afterthought on the auctioneer's clipboard. Cracked concrete, faded signage, one rusted roller door jammed halfway shut, the kind of place nobody looked at twice. But Maren Brooks did. She stood in work boots, too worn for the cold, eyeing the structure with the kind of focus most people saved for engines. The roof sagged near the rear corner, vines coiled around steel beams, but it was cheap. $600 cheap. And for someone like Maren, a self-taught mechanic with more drive than dollars, that was enough. The guy who sold it didn't even get out of his truck, just handed her a key, muttered something about old military stuff, and peeled off. She could still smell the stale cigarette smoke from his cab as she slid the lock open for the first time. The door groaned. Dust cascaded from the overhead beams like it had been holding its breath for decades. Inside, the light cut through broken windows in sharp angles. What was left of the warehouse interior looked like the aftermath of a war-zone garage sale: rusted tools, busted crates, bird nests in the rafters. But there was something else too. A feeling. It wasn't haunted, not exactly, just paused. Like time had come in here once and decided to wait. Maren walked slowly through the space, her boots echoing on the dusty floor. Every sound she made felt too loud. Her fingers trailed across rusted metal, a piece of military equipment. Maybe? She didn't recognize half of what was stacked around, but she knew weight. Machinery. History. At the very back of the warehouse, something caught her eye. A corrugated steel wall, different from the others. Cleaner. Newer, but still aged. Bolted shut with thick iron latches. It wasn't part of the building's architecture, it looked. Added, like a container within a container. On its surface, stenciled in fading blue, property of U.S. Army Air Forces, 1944. Maren's breath caught. She approached it like it might breathe back. There was no padlock, but the bolts were old and sealed tight. She pressed her palm to the surface. Cold, solid, heavy, with secrets. This wasn't junk. This was intentional. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the door like it might blink. Then she whispered to no one in particular, "What are you hiding?" Behind her, the warehouse remained silent, but something shifted in the air. A tension. As if something sealed away was now listening. She didn't know it yet, but opening that door wouldn't just change her life. It would rewrite someone else's, and someone, somewhere, was hoping she never would. It took Maren 3 days to clear the space around the sealed chamber. Old crates collapsed into dust when touched. Rolled up cables stiff with time cracked in her hands. Underneath it all, there were remnants of another era. A dented helmet with a faded star, a torn ration pack, even a crate of rusted wrenches stamped USAAF. She kept coming back to that phrase stenciled across the metal door. U.S. Army Air Forces, 1944. Not Air Force, singular, forces. That alone told her how old this was. The U.S. Army Air Forces, ceased to exist in 1947. This structure, whatever it held, had been sealed nearly 80 years. By the 4th day, she finally faced the bolts. There were 6 of them, thick, rusted, and set deep. Her wrenches weren't enough. She had to borrow an old breaker bar from the salvage yard up the road. Even with leverage, the first bolt shrieked like metal dying all over again. The second refused to move until she poured nearly half a bottle of penetrating oil into its grooves. By the time she cracked the final bolt, her gloves were torn, her knuckles raw, and her shoulders screaming. But she didn't care. Something inside her said this was worth it. Every part of her mechanic's instinct was alive now, buzzing like electricity beneath her skin. When the final latch gave way with a heavy clunk, she stood back. Dust fell like rain from the seam. The thick steel door had no handle, no keyhole. She pushed, shoulder first, gritting her teeth. It groaned open, inch by inch. The scent hit her first. Dry air, untouched. Metallic, but clean. Then came the cold, unnatural for the warehouse temperature. As the light crept in, she saw it. The chamber wasn't empty. 3 massive turbines sat aligned in the center of the sealed room, side by side, like sleeping beasts. Each one was mounted to its own base, polished and silent. No dust, no rust, no decay. They were pristine. Unbelievably so. Above them, a second line of faded stenciling ran across the curved inner wall. Do not remove. Sec. 5.7. Fog line clearance only. Maren stepped inside, barely breathing. The walls were lined with riveted steel. A small fluorescent fixture dangled overhead. The bulb inside cloudy but intact. No switch. No control panel. No paperwork. Just those engines. She reached out and touched the nearest turbine housing. It was cold. Not room temperature cold, unnatural cold. Like metal that had never been exposed to sunlight. She ran her hand along its surface, and that's when she saw it. A serial number, followed by a single, stamped phrase, experimental. Do not operate. Her throat tightened. These weren't just forgotten machines. These were buried on purpose. Hidden, sealed, and left as if the world was never meant to see them again. And now she had. She turned back toward the door, her heartbeat heavy in her ears. From the corner of the container, a light flickered just once, as if something inside had finally awakened. Maren stood frozen in the middle of the steel chamber, eyes fixed on the turbines like they might move. Her breath fogged the air colder now than before. The flicker of light in the corner had stopped, but it was enough. Something inside this chamber still had power, or memory, or both. She took a cautious step toward the wall, where she thought she'd seen it. Her boots echoed too sharply, too cleanly. The floor beneath her felt different than the warehouse floor. Not concrete. Reinforced steel. She knelt down and knocked with her knuckles. Hollow, she stood quickly, heart in her throat. This wasn't just storage, this was a vault. Back in her own shop, Maren had pulled apart everything from Harley engines to helicopter gearboxes. But this was beyond military grade. These turbines weren't jet engines. They weren't even turboprops. They were something else. Smaller than modern fighters, but denser, complex, experimental. And then she noticed the paint. Beneath the clean steel of the middle engine, a faint ghost of color, red and white, had been scrubbed off. But part of a symbol remained. Not a flag, not military markings. It was circular, like a company logo. Civilian? But what civilian in 1944 was building something like this? She ran her fingers over the faint stencil again. Most of it was gone, but 3 letters were barely visible. A-E-D. She stood back and whispered aloud. Who the hell are you? She didn't expect an answer, but the silence that followed felt loaded. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, but she didn't notice. She spent the next 2 hours circling each turbine, documenting every marking, every panel, every rivet. No one had been in here for decades, that much was clear. And yet, the steel walls were almost too clean. The air too preserved. It was like the room had been climate-controlled, except there was no generator, no wiring, no vents. That wasn't just strange. It was impossible. Finally, exhausted, Maren sank down on a crate near the door and opened the small satchel she always kept on her sketch pad. Pencil, flashlight, multi-tool. She flipped to a blank page and started to draw. Not a diagram. A memory. She'd seen this kind of obsessive note-taking before. In her father. Before cancer took him, he'd been a machinist with a photographic mind. He taught her to read engines like books. Every scratch told a story. Every seal, a decision. If he were here, he'd know what these were. But he wasn't. It was just her. A warehouse nobody wanted, and 3 engines that weren't supposed to exist. When she finally stood to leave, she turned back one last time. The middle turbine had something tucked beneath it. She hadn't seen it earlier. Just a sliver of canvas. She crouched, reached in carefully, and pulled out a bundle wrapped in waxed cloth. A folder. Military style. With one stamped word on the front, Fogline. She didn't open it. Not yet. Some doors, even when unbolted, needed a moment before you had the courage to walk through. The folder sat on her kitchen table like it might detonate. Maren had stared at it for an hour. After bringing it home, fingers tracing the word Fogline, embossed in faded black ink across the waxy green cover. There were no markings beyond that. No serial, no date. Not even a recipient. Just 2 tightly wound string loops holding the contents inside. She poured a cup of black coffee, sat down, and slowly unwound the string. Inside, a dozen pages, crisp despite their age, typewritten. Signed at the bottom in ink so faded she couldn't make out the name. The title on the first page stopped her cold. Project Fogline Phase. EII. Propulsion Study Non-Classified. Restricted Access. Maren's eyes scanned the first few lines. Propulsion systems intended for deployment under cloud ceiling operation protocols. Initial tests show elevated thrust-to-weight ratios exceeding 3.1 baseline. Projected use case in limited altitude maneuverable platforms. Experimental hybrid combustion divided by magnetic rotary cycle. Not to be distributed outside of Division AED. She read it again. Hybrid combustion and magnetic rotary? In 1944? That wasn't just ahead of its time, it shouldn't have existed. The tech didn't even reach theoretical stages until the 60 seconds. And yet here it was, sitting on her table in a folder that had been buried beneath 80 years of silence. Division AED. That name again. She flipped the page. Diagrams, blueprints, engine layouts that looked like turbojet hybrids, but the internal routing was wrong. No clear exhaust channels. And something that looked like a cyclotronic core at the center. Her stomach flipped. Whatever this was, it wasn't made to be flown by anything anyone talked about publicly. She thought back to the engines. How preserved they were. Not a speck of oil out of place. No oxidation. No smell of decay. That wasn't storage. That was containment. These things were sealed away with purpose. Back at the warehouse, she returned with gloves, a notepad, and a renewed edge of caution. The evening light filtered through the broken windows as she stepped back into the sealed chamber. The engines were still there, unmoved, but they felt different now. Knowing what they were, or at least what they were trying to be, made them heavier. Not in weight, in consequence. She crouched beside the third turbine and noticed something new. A thin wire coil tucked behind a maintenance panel. She pulled gently. It snapped free like a string pulled too tight. From inside the casing, a dim green glow blinked once. She stepped back fast. The glow disappeared. Her hand shook slightly as she exhaled. Then she saw the etching along the side of the baseplate. It had been obscured by dust, but now she read it clearly. Test engine, #2. Finalized the 16th of June, 1944. Not cleared for flight. Casualties unresolved. Casualties? She swallowed hard. These engines didn't just fail testing. They killed someone. And yet, someone had gone to great lengths to protect them. Not dismantle, not destroy. Preserve. That kind of secrecy doesn't happen by accident. Maren stood again, the folder under one arm, the silence of the chamber pressing in. She was in deeper than she'd realized, and something told her the real story hadn't even started yet. Maren wasn't the type to rattle easy, but after the folder, the glow, and the phrase, "casualties unresolved," she didn't sleep much. The warehouse, once just a cheap gamble, now felt like it had teeth, and she'd walked straight into its mouth. The next morning, she sat at her shop counter, sipping coffee that tasted like motor oil and nerves. She was reading the Fogline folder for the 10th time, trying to make sense of the blueprints, when the bell above the front door rang. She looked up. A man stood there, mid-70s, tall, lean, with the kind of posture that never fully leaves the military. Faded denim jacket, worn leather boots, and hands that looked like they could still field strip an engine in the dark. "You Maren Brooks?" he asked, voice low and smooth. She hesitated. "Yeah. Who's asking?" He stepped forward, pulling a card from his jacket. It wasn't government, no title, just a name, Harland Voss. "You bought the old River Road warehouse?" Her jaw tensed. "I did." He studied her. "Find anything unusual?" Maren didn't answer. Voss exhaled slowly, like he already knew. "I worked that facility, 1962, back when it was still officially decommissioned." She blinked. "So, not so decommissioned?" He gave a half smile. "Let's just say not everything that gets buried stays that way. I saw your name come up on an auction list. It rang bells. I didn't think anyone had the nerve to break that seal." "You knew about the chamber?" she asked. He nodded. "Helped bolt it shut." That hit like a punch to the chest. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her for a long time. "Because we weren't supposed to know what we saw. And the ones who did, they're not around to tell it." Maren grabbed the Fogline folder and held it up. "This mean anything to you?" His eyes darkened. Too much. He stepped past her and sat on the edge of a workbench like he'd done it 1,000 times. Project Fogline wasn't just propulsion. It was an arms race inside the arms race. Manhattan had its bomb. Fogline had its engines, experimental thrust systems, magnetic drive testing, even rumors of early anti-grav prototypes all decades ahead of their time. Maren leaned forward. "What went wrong?" He looked down. "Test flight the 7th of June 1944. Engine 2 powered up. Pilot named Garrison. 30 seconds into lift, the air turned. Wrong. Engine didn't roar. It hummed. Then the plane just vanished. Radar lost it. No crash site, no recovery. Just gone." She went cold. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean like it blinked out. Command scrubbed the program overnight, sealed the chamber, ordered everyone silent." Maren stared at him. "And you stayed silent? For 60 years? I signed papers that would ruin my life if I didn't. And by the time I wanted to talk, no one would listen." He stood, heading toward the door. "Whatever you do, kid, don't try to make them run." She followed. "Why?" He turned, eyes sharp. "Because if those engines start humming again, we might not be ready for what follows." After Harland Voss left, the shop felt heavier. His words clung to the walls, thicker than oil fumes, harder to shake. "Don't try to make them run." That warning echoed in her ears even as she went through the motions checking invoices, answering 2 voicemails, refilling the coffee pot she'd forgotten she'd already filled. But her mind was back in the warehouse, back inside the sealed chamber, back with those engines. By the afternoon, curiosity had beaten caution. She packed a satchel with gloves, the Fogline folder, a flashlight, and a disposable camera. Her phone battery died hours ago somehow. That felt safer, less traceable. Inside the chamber, the air was still cold, still impossibly dry. She stepped between the turbines like walking between monuments. Her eyes locked onto the base of engine #2, the one Garrison had supposedly flown. The serial numbers matched the folder's documentation. Maren set the camera on a nearby crate and began flipping through the folder again, this time looking for patterns. Midway through the stack, She found something new. A folded paper tucked behind a blueprint yellowed, handwritten. No header, no official stamp, just 2 words scribbled at the top. Operation Fog Line. She unfolded it. Initiate propulsion test sequence, only under condition clear. Magnetic containment fields unstable under rapid ascent. Observed side effects during Phase 2 included environmental distortion, acute hearing loss, and minor temporal displacement. See Addendum B. Note: Subject Garrison's vitals pre-launch showed elevated delta brainwave activity. Possible link to containment disruption, unknown. Following disappearance of Test Flight 7, all project materials are to be sealed per Presidential Directive 72-8C. This includes turbines, journals, and prototypes. Project suspended indefinitely. Maren reread the phrase, minor temporal displacement. She didn't believe in science fiction. She believed in machines, in torque specs, in the satisfying logic of combustion and crankshafts. But the government didn't seal off entire hangars over minor problems. Something went wrong, deeply wrong, and someone had used national security to bury it. She dug through more of the crate contents beside the turbines. Beneath a tarp she hadn't noticed before, she found a smaller, dented file box. The latch was broken. Inside, notebooks, diagrams, and photographs, black and white, grainy. Most of them showed the turbines under construction, men in military uniforms working on assembly lines. But one photo, blurry, almost damaged, showed something else entirely. A plane mid-lift, tethered to the ground. No wings, just a long cylindrical body and an open cockpit. Maren flipped it over. On the back, written in shaky pen, Garrison Phase 2 right before the hum started. She dropped the photo onto the crate, heart pounding. This wasn't just a forgotten engine test. It was a forgotten event, covered up, cleaned out, hidden so well even history couldn't find it. But now she had, and someone, somewhere, might know she had it. As she stepped out of the chamber to leave, she saw something new, a set of fresh footprints in the dust, near the main warehouse door. She hadn't left those. Someone had been watching, and they didn't want her to keep digging. The footprints were shallow, but distinct soles wider than her boots, spaced like someone moving slowly, carefully. Maren knelt beside them, brushing the dust with her fingers, heart pounding against her ribs. They trailed toward the chamber, then stopped abruptly a few feet short of the door. No return prints, no smear of retreat. Whoever had been there hadn't entered. They'd only come to look. She stood quickly, locked the warehouse door behind her, and drove straight home without glancing at the rearview mirror, though every nerve in her spine told her to. Once inside her trailer, she bolted the door, pulled the blinds, and sat at her workbench. The folder and photo box spread out beneath a single desk lamp. Among the blueprints, a manila envelope caught her eye, one she hadn't noticed before. It wasn't labeled like the others, just sealed shut with tape so old it flaked off in her hands. Inside were 4 pages, typed, but not technical. It was a report, or maybe a warning, to Division AED, Oversight. Unauthorized modifications to prototype units 2 and 3. Personnel from non-registered research group appended components to propulsion core without proper documentation. Additions resemble elements from foreign schematic, recovered in 194 Tour F. Operation Paperclip. Dossier 3B. Language on internal parts not of known German origin resembles unrecognized dialect. Possibly code. Field notes from Dr. Hargrove suggest the recovered tech was not meant to be replicated. Said, "There are gaps in our understanding that nature won't forgive." Maren read the line twice. Not of known German origin. Her skin prickled. Everyone knew the rumors. That World War II wasn't just a weapons race, it was a technology scramble. Both sides stealing, copying, experimenting. But this? This wasn't a prototype built from wartime engineering. This was something else. A knock hit her door. Sharp. 3 quick raps. She froze. No one visited her after hours, especially not when her truck was parked out of sight and all lights off but one. Another knock. Slower this time. She grabbed the wrench closest to her and crept toward the front window, peeked between the blinds. Empty porch. No shadows. No movement. Then, from the floor by her front door, she heard a soft thud, like something being slid through the mail slot. She waited, counted to 30, then opened the door and looked down. An envelope, unmarked. She carried it inside with gloved hands and tore it open over a towel. No note, no warning, just a single item inside, a brass gear, about the size of a silver dollar, intricately carved. But it wasn't like anything she'd seen before. The teeth didn't follow standard ratios. There were grooves along the center, as if designed to lock into something organic, alien even. Etched along the rim in a pattern that made her eyes hurt were symbols, none she recognized. She laid it beside the fog line materials. It didn't match anything. It didn't belong. But it had found its way to her anyway. Someone knew she had the files. And now, they were sending her pieces. The gear sat on her desk like a riddle carved in brass. Maren couldn't stop staring at it, at the way the grooves caught the light, the way the symbols almost moved when viewed from the side. It didn't feel like a part from the past. It felt placed, like a message. She barely slept that night. And when she did, her dreams were strange. Silent hangars, humming engines, clouds moving backward. She woke up at 3:12 a.m., her heart hammering, the gear now resting on her nightstand. She didn't remember moving it. By morning, she was back at the warehouse, not to investigate the turbines. Not yet. She needed something human, a thread she could follow that wasn't blueprints or ominous warnings or phantom visitors, something to remind her that people built this, that people buried it. She turned her focus to a stack of rusted tool chests in the far corner of the main warehouse. One was locked with a padlock, so old it snapped under light pressure. Inside, mostly junk, but at the bottom, wrapped in stiff, grease-stained oilcloth, was a small leather-bound book, a journal. Her breath caught as she unwrapped it. The cover was cracked, the spine nearly split. Inside, dense writing in black ink. Clean, technical handwriting, dated entries. The name on the inside cover made her freeze. Lieutenant Everett Hargrove, Project Fogline, Division AED. She sat on an overturned crate, careful not to damage the pages, and began to read. The 3rd of June, 1944. They brought in the device this morning. Crated, unmarked, delivered by a group that refused to give names, just codes and silence. I was told not to ask. Of course I asked anyway. No answers, just stares. The gear assembly defies everything we know. It doesn't obey standard ratios, no clear metallurgy. The more we test it, the more anomalies we get. Changes in temperature, magnetic flux, even time drift. We ran the same test 3 times, got 3 different results. One clock ran backward. The 6th of June, 1944. We installed the core into Engine 2, against my better judgment. The external team said it was non-negotiable. I no longer believe this is about propulsion. I think we're trying to tap into something we don't understand, and it's starting to affect the team. Engineer Reynolds spoke in his sleep last night, in a language none of us recognized. He hasn't spoken since. Maren looked up, throat dry. This wasn't just experimentation. This was obsession, interference, something foreign. Not foreign like another country. Foreign like another rulebook. She flipped ahead. The 15th of June, 1944. Tomorrow's the test. Garrison knows the risks, but he volunteered. Says if it works, he wants his name remembered. I'm scared it won't be his name they remember. I've written a sealed addendum to the log. If something goes wrong, someone has to know this wasn't our design. We copied something we couldn't fully see. I can feel the hum in my bones now. Even when the turbines aren't running. Maren closed the journal. The humming. She'd felt it too. Once, standing in that chamber, after the coil snapped. Lieutenant Hargrove had tried to leave a record, and if he was right, those engines weren't just machines. They were keys, and the lock was something not built by human hands. The morning air was brittle with silence, the kind that made even birds hesitate. Maren had locked the warehouse tight the night before, double-checked the bolt, shoved a crowbar through the inside handles. Still, when she arrived at 7:03 a.m., the side door was hanging open. Not broken. Unlocked. She stood in the doorway, not crossing the threshold. The hair on her arms rose before she even stepped inside. Something had shifted. She could feel it. Deep in her chest, that low, stomach-sick sense mechanics get when an engine sounds just off. The chamber was still sealed. The turbines sat just as they had, but the gear she'd left inside the brass lockbox on her workbench, gone. In its place sat a single photograph. Color. Modern. Her. Taken from outside her shop, sometime within the past 2 days. She was kneeling beside her truck, wrench in hand, hair tied back, grease streaked across her jaw, unaware. On the back of the photo, scrawled in pen, "Some things are sealed for a reason." Stop. Her throat tightened. Not just fear, now rage. Someone had broken into her space, crossed a line, threatened her. And worst of all, they knew everything. About the turbines, the journal, the gear. They were watching. She grabbed the photo, slid it into her back pocket, and returned to the chamber. It was time to stop waiting for answers to come to her. She started inspecting the turbines again, this time not for restoration, for truth. And when she opened the access panel beneath engine #3, she found something that nearly made her drop her flashlight. A second gear, just like the first. Same carvings, same impossible structure, but this one had been installed. Not recently. Decades ago. She stared at it, heart pounding. The gear hadn't been placed as part of the engine's design. It had been forced in, wedged behind a plate that didn't match any part of the turbine's original blueprint. She reached in and gently pulled it free. As soon as it slid out, the lights in the chamber flickered. Once, twice, then dimmed. A hum. Faint. Lower than hearing. More like a vibration in her spine. She stood slowly, backing away from the engine. The hum faded. The room stilled. But she knew now what Lieutenant Hargrove had meant. The gears weren't components. They were triggers. And whoever had sent the first one to her, they weren't just warning her off. They were testing her, seeing how far she'd go. She turned and sealed the chamber again, fingers shaking as she turned each bolt. Outside the warehouse, the wind had picked up. Dry leaves scattered across the parking lot, like whispers, running from something unseen. And from the ridge across the road, half hidden behind a rusted water tower, a black SUV idled, windows dark, no plates, watching, waiting. The next morning, Maren didn't open the shop. She didn't answer texts. She didn't even start her truck. Instead, she spread everything she had across her kitchen table. The photos, the gear, the fogline folder, Hargrove's journal, and the brass gear she'd pried from engine #3. She needed to understand, not just what these engines were, but what they were for. By afternoon, she was back in the chamber, kneeling beneath engine #1 with a borrowed borescope. It wasn't until she slid the flexible camera deep into the turbine's rear core that she saw it a hollow channel, not part of any known propulsion system. The space wasn't connected to airflow. It didn't serve any mechanical function. It was shaped like a loop, a closed circuit with no fuel input, no compression zones, just smooth metal winding back on itself, over and over again, like a ring, a continuous cycle. She pulled back, heart pounding. That's when it hit her. These weren't flight engines. They weren't built for movement. They were built for containment. The gear slots, the looping core, the strange magnetic readings, it all pointed to one thing. These turbines weren't designed to power something. They were designed to hold something. The gear wasn't a drive component. It was a lock. And if you removed it, you didn't release thrust. You released whatever had been trapped inside. Her chest tightened with the thought. What had Garrison flown that day in 1944? What had blinked off radar and never returned? What kind of machine hums instead of roars, alters clocks, and leaves no debris? She thought of Hargrove's words: temporal distortion, hearing loss, language no one recognized. Not propulsion, interference. Whatever this engine once did, it twisted the laws of physics like wet wire. And if one of those units still had energy in it, and the glow she'd seen said it did, then she was sitting on something far more dangerous than buried tech. She was sitting on a reactivating system. Behind her, the door to the chamber creaked. She spun, flashlight raised. But no one was there. Just the hum again. A low vibration that had no source, no power supply, no wires to track. It was like the turbines were remembering something. She backed out slowly, sealing the chamber tight. She knew now why the engines had been sealed, why there were no documents beyond 1,944. Why the project was purged, and the survivors scattered into silence. These weren't engines for planes. They were anchors. Maren stood alone in the warehouse, pulse drumming in her ears. The world outside was moving as if nothing had changed. But deep in her gut, she knew better. She wasn't restoring history. She was disturbing it. And if she kept going, she wouldn't just uncover the truth. She might unleash it. She found the photo in the last place she expected, taped beneath the false bottom of the journal's oilcloth wrap. Folded twice, edges brittle, barely holding together. The image was grainy, almost too dark to make out. But once her eyes adjusted, Maren could see the silhouette of a strange craft on a flat, sunlit runway. No wings, no tail. Just a smooth, pod-like fuselage and the shadow of a man climbing into the cockpit. A handwritten caption beneath it read, "Garrison, June 16th, 1,944 minutes before test flight 7. Maren stared at the image for a long time, the silence in her trailer so thick it rang in her ears. This was it. The moment everything began. The man who flew into nothing and took the truth with him, until now. She scanned the rest of the journal again. Hargrove's entries grew more frantic in the final pages. Asterisk flight path logged. Liftoff confirmed. Engine 2, engaged at 68%. No audible thrust. Craft elevated vertically 15 feet. No heat trail. At 0:43 seconds, onboard radio ceased. At 0:47, external observers noted a spatial shimmer. At 0:50, craft disappeared. Asterisk. No crash. No explosion. No body. Just gone. A few lines down. High-pitched ringing in left ear. Sustained for 47 hours. Clocks in observation tower ran backward for 9 minutes. Pilot presumed Kia. Command ordered complete lockdown. Said, seal the tech. Forget the name. Maren's fingers trembled as she traced the words. Forget the name, as if Garrison had never existed. As if the erasure of a man, a mission, and a machine was safer than the truth. She rose from her chair and pulled out the second gear from her shop drawer. It hummed faintly against her palm, not with sound, but with presence, like it remembered being installed, like it wanted to be installed again. She made a decision. Back at the warehouse, she entered the chamber like someone entering a sacred space. Her breath fogged. The turbines waited. She moved to engine Hasson, the only one without a gear inside. The panel at its base had a matching socket. She reached out, slowly, carefully, and fit the gear into place. Nothing happened. No glow, no hum, no change. Then, as she stepped back, she heard it soft at first, like wind catching a pipe, a tone, high, pure, not mechanical. She turned. The turbine's core began to glow faint green, like phosphorescence from the ocean floor. A low vibration trembled beneath her boots. Then, she saw it. On the far wall of the chamber, the steel began to ripple, not physically, but like light through water. A distortion, a shimmer, exactly what Hargrove had described. She backed away slowly, heart hammering. Whatever Garrison had flown into, it wasn't the sky. It was somewhere else. And now, something on the other side might be looking back. She almost didn't open the tin box. It had been wedged between rusted crates in the furthest corner of the warehouse, hidden behind a sheet of decaying canvas tarp. At first glance, it looked like every other forgotten toolbox from the 1942 dented, gray, paint flaking. But the latch was newer, clean, clicked open with a crisp snap. Inside, beneath a folded linen cloth, were 6 letters. Yellowed, folded twice, preserved, like someone had been waiting decades for someone to find them. The return address was the same on all of them. Lieutenant Everett Hargrove, Division AED, Hangar 7. But the recipient's name stopped Maren cold. Miss Joanna Garrison. Her heart twisted. Garrison, the pilot who vanished. She unfolded the first letter carefully, the paper delicate as ash. The 2nd of June, 1944. Dear Joe, I know it's not proper to write you without permission, but I'm not sure who else would understand. Your brother. He volunteered for the fog line project, knowing what it might cost him. But he believes in it. Not in the war, necessarily. In the possibility of something bigger. I think he's afraid he'll disappear, not just from this earth, but from memory. I promised him I'd keep record, that if something went wrong, someone would still know who he was. Maren set the letter down, her breath shaky. She opened the next one, on the 17th of June, 1944. Joe, he's gone. The official report says, pilot lost in mechanical failure. But that's not the truth. There was no failure. There was something else, a kind of vanishing. The air folded, Joe. The space itself bent. It wasn't just a crash. It was like he flew through something. And now command has ordered the whole thing sealed. No one's allowed to talk. They say it's for morale, for security. But I think it's fear. Because if what we built really worked, then we don't know where he went, or if he's still there. She blinked hard, the words blurring. Still there. She opened the last letter. No date, no greeting, just a single line. If anyone finds this, he's not dead. The engine opened something, and I think it stayed open. Maren sat back against the crate, the letter trembling in her hands. This wasn't just about covering up a failed experiment. This was about erasing an entire reality, about locking it behind gears and steel and secrecy. She thought of the shimmer on the chamber wall, the tone, the way the turbine had responded. Garrison may not have died. He may have crossed over, and if the chamber was reactivating, that boundary might not stay shut for long. She looked around the warehouse like she was seeing it for the first time. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a door, and someone had already gone through. Maren didn't sleep that night. Not because she couldn't, because she didn't dare. The idea that the engine hadn't failed, but succeeded, rewrote everything she thought she knew. If the machine had opened something, if Garrison had flown through it, then Fogline wasn't a failed propulsion experiment. It was a gateway. By morning, the fear had hardened into resolve. She made copies of the letters, scanned every page of Hargrove's journal, backed up the blueprints and photographs, and stored them in 3 different cloud drives under encrypted aliases. She even mailed a flash drive to a friend out west, someone who wouldn't ask questions but knew how to keep secrets. If they came for her now, they wouldn't be able to bury it again so easily. But the more she prepared, the more she realized just how deeply buried the truth had been. She searched public archives. Nothing. No mention of Division AED, no record of Lieutenant Everett Hargrove, no military record for Elias Garrison, the pilot who supposedly vanished in 1944. Not even in the most obscure World War II pilot memorials. It was like he'd been erased by design. But someone had tried to fight back. Back at the warehouse, she pried loose the access panel behind engine #2 again, the one that had emitted the faint hum when she disturbed it. This time, she dug deeper, removing layers of shielding, until her hand struck something cold and flat. A box. lead-lined. Inside, a final stack of documents. Different paper, different markings, stamped across the top of each. Eyes-only presidential oversight. Directive 728C. She opened the first. Per directive issued July 1944, Project Fog Line is to be suspended indefinitely. All personnel reassigned. All records destroyed or secured within Hangar 7 containment. Any surviving prototype units are to be deactivated and sealed. Civilian exposure deemed low probability. If reactivation is detected, Protocol 8 Black is authorized. This includes recovery, containment, or full neutralization of subject and involved parties. Maren stared at the word neutralization. They weren't just worried about the machines. They were worried about people. She flipped to the final page, a handwritten note, clearly added later. Dated 1961. We should have dismantled the chamber. But no one knew how. The gear mechanism appears to be part of the system, but not from it. They told us it was German salvage. But I've worked on Messerschmitts. I've seen Soviet jet cores. This isn't from any war I fought. My guess? It's older. Much older. Maybe not even ours. No signature. No initials. Just silence at the end of the page. Maren leaned back against the wall, the box beside her, the turbine still faintly humming behind her. She understood now why the chamber was bolted. Why Hargrove documented in secret. Why Garrison's name was lost. They hadn't just buried a failed experiment. They'd buried a window, one that had opened once, and now, all signs pointed to one thing. It was starting to open again. It was nearly midnight when Maren found the final container. She'd returned to the warehouse not to search, but to listen. Every turbine had its own presence now, a hum that came not from mechanics, but memory. Engine Hasson, where she'd installed the gear, resonated like a tuning fork struck once and left vibrating through time. The others waited. Something told her she was missing one last piece. She climbed the metal stairs to the catwalk overlooking the chamber. The air was colder up here. Below, the turbines shimmered faintly under the overhead lights, their casings almost pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. And that's when she saw it. A seam in the far wall, nearly invisible in the corrugated steel. A rectangular outline, waist-high, dustless, recently disturbed. She climbed down and crossed the chamber, her breath fogging with every step. When she pressed against the seam, it gave a thin metal panel swung open on silent hinges, revealing a hidden compartment no bigger than a suitcase. Inside, a box, sleek, black, unlike anything else she'd found. No hinges, no latches, just a smooth faceplate with a single triangular indentation at the center. And something else, a handwritten tag tied to a metal ring. Do not open. AED oversight. 1944. Maren stared at it. This was it. The true heart of the project. The reason the chamber existed. Everything else, the turbines, the gears, the documents, had pointed to this. She touched the indentation lightly with her thumb. Nothing happened. Then, almost without thinking, she reached into her coat pocket, the one where she'd been keeping the second brass gear since prying it loose. The gear's center spindle matched the triangle. She lined it up, pressed it in. The box clicked. A seam appeared across its top. Slowly, silently, the lid slid open, revealing a velvet-lined interior. There were only 3 items inside. A small silver device, no bigger than a pager, smooth and glowing faintly from within. A strip of film, tightly rolled, marked with the number 7. A handwritten letter, sealed in wax. Maren opened the letter first. The handwriting was rushed but familiar. Everett Hargrove. If you're reading this, then the gears have turned again. The device is not ours. It was recovered in 1942 from a crash site near the Baltic Sea. Not a plane, not any craft I've ever seen. We were told to reverse engineer it. We failed, but we did activate it once. June 16th, 1944. Garrison went through. The film is all we have left. Do not activate the device, unless you are prepared to follow him. He may still be alive, or he may be waiting for someone brave enough to try. Maren's breath caught. The device in the box vibrated faintly, not like a motor, but like a heartbeat. It had waited 80 years. Now, it had found her, and the question was no longer what the engine opened. It was whether she had the courage to step through it. Maren stared at the device in the box, its soft glow pulsing like it had a rhythm of its own. Not electrical, but organic. It wasn't cold either. When she touched it, her fingers felt warmth. Steady. Alive. She didn't know what she expected. Opening the chamber's last hidden vault. Maybe more documents. Another old warning. But this was something else. It wasn't built in wartime. It wasn't bolted down or shielded like a weapon. It felt different. Like it had come from another place entirely. She sat cross-legged on the cold floor of the chamber, the box open in front of her, the letter from Hargrove beside her boot, and the tiny glowing device resting in her palm. The gears, the turbines, the humming. It all pointed here. Do not activate the device, unless you are prepared to follow him. The words haunted her. Maren glanced toward engine, Hassan the one she'd completed with the gear. The ripple across the far chamber wall was back, subtle, flickering in the corner of her eye whenever she looked away. She thought of Garrison, of Joanna, of a pilot who'd vanished into thin air, not in failure but in transition. Through what? A field? A fold in space? Another world? The questions kept piling up, but one answer rang louder than the rest. This wasn't about restoration anymore. It was about release. The machine, the entire chamber, wasn't built to be opened and studied. It was built to send, not just power through turbines, but a person, a traveler. She slid the film canister from the box and held it to the light. It was still sealed. Dated July 1944. Someone had developed it. Hargrove, maybe. But no one had dared view it again. She'd need a projector, an old one, and privacy. But even before watching, she knew what the reel might contain. A record of what Garrison saw, or where he went. The thought made her stomach twist. Because, as terrifying as it was, the tug inside her, the ache that had driven her to break bolts, translate documents, decipher gears, it hadn't been curiosity. It had been recognition. This wasn't someone else's mystery anymore. It was hers. She stood and walked to engine Hassan. Its glow pulsed in rhythm with the device in her hand. She reached forward and placed the device into a small circular cradle she hadn't noticed before, directly above the gear slot. It fit, clicked. A soft tone rang through the chamber, not loud, but pure, like a bell rung miles away. The ripple on the far wall sharpened. It wasn't a shimmer now. It was a door, a perfect oval, shifting with color and light, like liquid glass. She took a step forward, then stopped. Not from fear, from reverence. She was staring into the unknown, into the same silence Garrison had disappeared into, and now it waited. For her. The chamber pulsed around her, steady as a heartbeat, alive in ways no machine should be. The oval shimmer in the far wall had stabilized. Not a hallucination, not a projection, a portal. Maren stood before it, one hand brushing the edge of the glowing threshold, the other still trembling from locking the device into place. It was silent now. Not like emptiness, like expectation. She thought of Garrison. A name erased from history. A pilot buried not in the ground but in possibility. He hadn't crashed. He'd crossed. And for 80 years, he'd been little more than a footnote in a folder no one was supposed to find. Until her. She pulled the film canister from her pocket, hands shaking, and slid it into the old Bell and Howell projector she'd dragged from the attic of her shop hours earlier. It rattled softly, ancient but eager. She turned it on, the low mechanical whir, filling the quiet like a whisper from another lifetime. The reel clicked. Footage played across the far wall of the chamber, the shimmer not disturbed, but glowing beneath the projection like it welcomed the memory. Black and white, faded. A figure climbed into a wingless pod. No helmet, just a harness. Garrison. Then, the engine hummed, just like hers. The footage distorted as the craft lifted. No sound, only vibration. And then he vanished. Not in an explosion, not in a blur. He simply wasn't there anymore. And yet, the film kept rolling. The next frames were strange. Not the hangar, not Earth, just sky. Endless, violet-tinged sky over a horizon that curved upward. A flash of light, a shadow, tall, impossible. Then black. The reel ended. Maren turned off the projector, her eyes still locked on the portal ahead. It hadn't wavered. She stood in silence, the gear humming behind her, the engine alive, the doorway breathing softly in sync with her own chest. She could shut it down, walk away, seal the chamber again, tell no one. But that wasn't why she came this far. This wasn't about engines anymore. It was about what we leave behind, when we forget what we were once brave enough to attempt. She stepped closer. The shimmer wrapped around her fingertips like warm static. Not painful, inviting. Behind her, the turbines throbbed once a final nudge, and then, with one steady breath, Maren Brooks stepped into the light. The portal folded around her like silk, and just like Garrison, she was gone. No explosion, no sound, no trace. Just the low hum of engine Hasson, spinning slower now, quieter, content. Back in her shop, the letters, the journal, the film, all remained. As did the mural she'd painted last winter. A landscape of sky no one had seen before. But now, someone had. And if Maren's instincts were right, this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the next.